Hello.
Hey Ben, how are you?
Hi,
I'm
Ben.
fine. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Looks like you're connected two ways.
Yeah,
Hello.
I'll disconnect. Uh,
We having to do it again?
Oh, what, Jenny?
Oh, are we on the right one?
We are on the right one. Yeah, Ben was disconnecting one of his, I think.
Okay.
thought I had figured out how to disconnect the other one.
Well, I don't guess it matters. It's not messing up your audio or video. Do y'all know any reason why you should try to disconnect that one, April? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, Ben, and put you on spotlight video. I don't think it may not change everyone else's view, but it will change the view of the recording. So your face will be on the screen all the time.
I'll be right back.
I think the other one is closed now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Okay, great.
April, what do you see on your screen?
I see the four callers at the top and Ben, but Ben is the big image.
Okay.
You know, do you know that feature of hiding people that have their audio muted, I think, or their video muted? There's a feature on there that is like an option that if someone is muted, that it will hide them from visibility.
Right. Okay.
So I don't know if that impacts what the recording is picking up or not. So I mean, if the recording is only picking up him, then no big deal.
Right, right. Ben, can you move your screen so that you have a little bit more of your face in the video? Okay.
Am I close enough or does it matter?
I think you look, yeah, I think you look good. Let's see. Ben, do you have any other light you could turn on in your room where you are?
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. And that way
And
I'll just jump in if I need to ask a supplemental question or something later
That
on.
better?
Yeah, I think that's a little better. Yeah. Um, yeah, let's go back a little bit more to where you were so that the phone cord is not right behind you.
you talking to me?
No, I'm sorry. I was talking to Ben. Maybe go a little bit further to your left, Ben. Move a little bit more that way.
Okay.
Let's do a little bit more. There's like a little something on the wall behind you that's sort of showing up like it's on top of your head.
Yeah.
Maybe put more of the china cabinet in your background.
Okay.
I've got a bunch of devices plugged up. I'm trying to make sure they're all connected.
Does that help?
Perfect. That will do it. Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. Go back a little bit more the way you had it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's good. So, all right, hey. We are ready. So when you guys are ready, April, y'all go right ahead.
This is I guess we call it supplemental interview with Ben Cole, who is the current executive director of North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. And this is July 17th, 2020. And I guess following the format we did before, we're on a Zoom interview. We're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. So we're doing these from home this time. I'm Jenny Kilgore. I am the coordinator of the North Mississippi Rural Legal Services Oral History Project and former director of the Elder Law Project, and before that, staff attorney and managing attorney, senior attorney. So Ben, we have with us today Morgan Cuderini, who's overseeing our video and our filmmaking part of this project, and April Grayson is with us, who is an oral historian working with us. So I have reviewed your last video, the one we did in 2019, and I just had a couple of areas that I wanted to follow up on, if we could. And one of the things I noticed, Ben, in your first interview was that you talked about how you joined legal services during the time of the civil rights movement, and you talked about the way you noticed in Mississippi the law had in some areas had already changed, but it lagged behind in terms of it being in effect in North Mississippi. And you said it took people standing up to force the system to put the laws into effect that would give people their rights. And unless people stood up, you said, the laws would not be in effect. And that was one of the things that inspired you about coming to work at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. And you talked about some of the people who stood up with the lawyers, one of whom was Mildred Quarles, you said, who, with her son, was one of the plaintiffs, the named plaintiffs in the Oxford School District desegregation case. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on your knowledge of Ms. Quarles' activities through the years. She, from the very beginning, was involved.
Yes, Ms. Quarles was a lady that I first met in Oxford, and she was on the board of directors of North Mississippi Rural Legal Services at the time. But I did learn about her prior activities, and at least was familiar with a lot of her activities after I met her. And so she was a person who was concerned about the community. She was concerned especially about the disparity, the discrimination, I guess you could say, that especially African Americans faced in the community. And she was concerned about the inequities. And so she was a person, she was a doer. And so where she saw inequities, she tried to take steps to right or correct those inequities. And so she was a person that not only talked, but she also acted. And just the example of the lawsuit that she filed on behalf of her son to desegregate the schools in Oxford and Lafayette County.
Are we still on?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, is everything
Okay.
okay?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
I was just waiting for you.
Okay. All right. And so I was wondering if you could kind of explain how the board members, well, before we go to that, were there other people who were community members that you can recall that particularly I was inquiring today somewhat about some of the women in the community who are also examples of community activists that the lawyers and advocates at NMRLS worked with?
Yeah, there was a Mrs. Matthews from Benton County. There was a Catherine Parrish from Marshall County. Ms. Dora Adams, I think she was from West Point. Ms. Laura Hampton especially I think Miss Hampton was from maybe the Corinth area. She was from the northeastern part of the state. Miss Hampton, in particular, was a an advocate, and especially served on the board of directors of North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, and so she particularly stands out in my mind. Just the name.
Yes, I recall Miss Hampton quite well. Um, so could you tell us, you mentioned that she served on the board, what sometimes the client members would call the big board, the North Mississippi Rural Legal Services Board of Directors. How did they end up with those positions, the community people?
Yeah, in terms of the composition of the board of directors, since the majority of the funding for North Mississippi Rural Legal Services comes from the National Legal Services Corporation, the regulations requires that at least 1/3 of the board members have to be client eligible people. And so the mechanism that was set up years ago was for to get community people involved. And so the structure was to have at least one person from each justice court district in each county to serve on the local advisory committee. So at that time, there were 5 justice court districts in each county, and so there would be a meeting in which people would come to the meeting. It would be publicized. People would come to the meeting, and then people either could volunteer from their district to serve on the local advisory committee. If there were a number of people who were interested, then I guess they would decide among themselves who would be the representative from each of those districts. And so you'd have up to five people, client eligible people from each county to serve on the local advisory committees. And so from those local advisory committees, then there would be an election to determine who got elected to serve on the board of directors. As you say, what generally they call the big board.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you think that model worked well for our program?
Yeah, I think it did work very well, because you had people who came from the community. They were concerned about the community, and then they were also expected to report back to the community. So the people who served on the board, the model was that prior to a board meeting, the board meeting would be, there'll be a notice of the board meeting. The client members of the board were to meet with the other members of the local advisory committee, as well as anybody else in the community, to kind of find out about what's going on, what problems are existing in the community, what concerns the community wanted them to bring back to the board. And so then that board member would bring those concerns back to the board. It would be discussed at the board meeting. And then if any action was taken or any suggestions were made, then that board member had the responsibility of bringing that back, reporting that back to the local advisory committee, as well as the community at large. So I think that worked very well, both to get input to the board, so that the board and the program had a good sense of the needs in the community, and so that it could then focus its resources to respond to those pressing legal needs in the community.
So you did the governing body and the executive director then ever change direction because of what was brought back from the community by these board members?
Yes, those concerns were taken into account, and each year, again, the Legal Services Corporation regulations requires that the board of directors set priorities, and so some priorities for the use of its resources, and resources, especially in terms of its legal resources, the cases that it would handle, that kind of that type of thing. And so that weighed heavily in terms of informing the board, the executive director, the program about the legal needs in the community. And so therefore, based upon those legal needs, then the program then would go about setting its priorities in terms of what types of cases, what types of resources would be committed to handling those cases, and establishing its official priorities, its priorities in terms of legal representation and cases that it was going to handle during that current year. And of course, that was an annual requirement. So sometimes the priorities would change the next year based upon the input, and that was not the only thing that was taken into consideration, but that was one of the considerations that the regulation requires, that there be input from the client community and the community at large.
Well, would you say that this model, having client representatives on the big board, made the advisory committees and these contacts with the community more than just what it is for some organizations? It's just sort of a committee that's not really that effective, and in some instances I've seen in the state, but kept it a very live, forceful connection with the community. The fact that these folks were on the an elected representative from the client committees was on the big board.
Yeah, it did, and I think one from the program itself, in terms of how it invited input from the community, so the community realized that their input was valuable, and so the client persons on the board were taken seriously by the program, by the executive directors and the other board members, because they knew that there were other members of the community. This just wasn't one person talking about what they think, their personal thoughts, but they were bringing to the table the concerns of a number of other people. So they were true representatives of the community. And so the program realized that, they recognized that, and they encouraged that.
I recall not just the big issues, but even if, say, a secretary had a bad day and a receptionist and snapped at a client coming in, not been as courteous as the client thought they should be, that even issues like that could be brought to the big board, so to speak. And, it made the offices more responsive, when you think.
Right, yeah, that is correct. And so, of course, one of the other things I did admire about the board, throughout the years, has traditionally been that for the most part, there's separation between the board and its responsibilities, and then the staff and its responsibilities. But issues like that would be brought to the board, and then, of course, to the executive director. Then the executive director was then given, made aware of that, and then given the board's opinion and the board's, I guess you could say, directive in terms of how it wanted the program to operate. And so then if there were situations where the executive director then needed to go back and to correct improper actions of certain staff, then that's how those things were brought to the board and brought to the executive director, and then in turn would be handled And so consequently, staff was aware that they were accountable to the community as well.
Yeah. Another area I was interested in, a little follow up, was in you spoke about NMRLS being a training ground for lawyers who became future leaders, not only in the state but in the country, and that Wilhelm Joseph had the foresight to see at an early point that the community workers could add to the effectiveness of the representation of the clients with more training as paralegals. And so I just wondered, you mentioned that training program. Could you give us a little more detail about how that was set up and who did the training? Do you remember?
Yes, well, actually, the community workers, that was the initial name that was given to people who were non-lawyers and who worked with people who had legal problems. And so Wilhelm had the insight to know that they needed to upgrade their skills, and so he initiated a training program, in which I think he engaged a person. I think his last name was Knox. I want to say Jim Knox, but Mr. Knox developed a curriculum and training program where the community workers were trained as paralegals, and so they received that initial round of training, and then eventually, because of that training and because of their experience, we had a number of people who became licensed paralegals, and some who did not receive their license, but they had the knowledge, they had the training, and they worked directly under attorneys, and they were in fact doing work as paralegals, working with lawyers. Some developed different skills. Some were drafting pleadings. Some were working with lawyers with divorces. They would draft the pleadings, give them to the lawyer to review them. The person would work with the client. They would let the client know what they needed, what witnesses they needed, various things like that. And paralegals in various degrees would work close with the attorneys, and some even went to court with the attorneys to assist in terms of relating to the client and to get the work done on their case. So there were various roles that paralegals played in North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, just as in the general sector. There are different paralegals who work in different aspects or different areas of the law. We also had paralegals who did the same thing at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services.
And we had quite a few paralegals back then. So
yes,
true. Yeah. So did any of these paralegals go on to use these skills as they went after they left the program? Is this in the same way that lawyers went on to do some important things?
Yes, there certainly was. And that comes to mind would be Joanne White, who was in the Holly Springs office. You had Mary Sue Gordon, who's in the Oxford office. Macy Wooten, who was in the Greenwood office. And especially take note of Ernest Cunningham. Ernest Cunningham, after he left North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, he had an illustrious career in Marshall County. He became sheriff of Marshall County. think he served at least one term, maybe 2 terms as sheriff, and then he became justice court judge. He served several terms as justice court judge until recently when his health failed him. And unfortunately, Judge Cunningham passed last year. But he had an illustrious career, uh, uh, and especially as justice court judge. And it all started goes back to when he worked with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services as a paralegal.
All right, thank you. Could you just briefly also elaborate, going on with the commitment to legal education that this program had, and in my opinion still has? Could you elaborate a little more about that commitment of the program, even during your time?
Yes, I think again, a lot of, I mean, you just can't say enough about the insight of Wilhelm Joseph. So when I came, I was hired by Wilhelm, and so Wilhelm just had the insight and knowledge, knowing that a person could be more valuable, could do more if they enhance their skills. And so he did that, as we talked about, with the upgrading the community workers to paralegals, but he also invested quite a bit of resources and monies to train the lawyers, so that lawyers was at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services was some of the better trained lawyers, I'd say, in the state at the time. And so that has continued throughout the years because of the result that the program and the board saw, the benefits of the training, and how it benefited the employees, and in turn how it benefited the program, and the results that resulted from that. The program committed to continuing to provide training for its staff. And that certainly included the attorney staff. And so you're right, that commitment continues today.
Yeah, I think during the time, of course, I was official employee for 38 years, that commitment stayed steady the whole time. And even given the financial strains on the program that you elaborated on in the first interview, the commitment stayed with the program. So, I think a lot of that credit needs to go to you as well as Wilhelm. That's just my thought. I wanted to know, I'm not sure if you thought about this, but just along those same lines, when I came out of law school in '75, women were not offered, female law students, internships in the same way that African American students were not. The places where internships were available could accept or reject interns. And so I was wondering, since I came to work at Legal Services early in my career, if you could comment on, you've already discussed NMRLS as a training ground for Black lawyers. Do you remember that it also served a purpose as training grounds for women in the law?
Yes, I don't think there really was any difference between the commitment of North Mississippi Rural Legal Services to having a place or making a place for women, as well as African Americans and minority students that came out of law school. It was a matter of uh, getting, I'd say probably the best and the brightest persons. And so North Mississippi Rural Legal Services became a place where a person could come and make a name for themselves. So again, I think it was the culture of the organization which started from the top, and I can relate especially from the time that I was associated with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, going back to Wilhelm Joseph, and the fact that it didn't matter, uh, you know, what color you were. I mean, there were African American lawyers, there were Caucasian lawyers. It didn't matter, and as well as female attorneys. So female, it didn't matter whether they were African American females or whether they were Caucasian females. They were valued. People were valued for what they could bring to the table, and so there was no distinction made between them. And so that was modeled from the top. And so it continued down through the staff. The board also valued that. And so it was reflected throughout the organization. So women certainly had a place that they could come to, and they could feel valued. They could uh, uh, just get out there and learn to practice law, and that's what they did. They flourished at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services.
I certainly concur on that. I found the same opportunities, the same treatment in the program, absolutely no difference. It was a very supportive atmosphere. Can you, I know you've elaborated already in the first interview about a few of the women who made a difference after within and without the program. And you mentioned Carol White and a couple of other people in the first interview. I didn't know if there were other examples you wanted to add or had thought about since then.
But there was certainly some of the attorneys left North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. Some went to the legislature, and of course there were a number that became judges. Like for example, W.M. Sanders, who's currently serving as a judge. So just a number of people. I don't remember. It just escapes me right now. But there are a number of women who left North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, and some, even I recall, like Maudine Eckwood, went to. She practiced in state government. Gloria Green in state government in Jackson. Just a number of actually, I really, to be honest with you, can't think of any of the female attorneys that left North Mississippi Rural Legal Services that didn't elevate their career and do excellent jobs in the positions that they went to.
Thank you. So just a couple of other areas I wanted to get a little additional information. There were two things. You gave an excellent discussion in your first interview about what happened throughout the years with the way that NMRLS developed. And there were two areas I wanted to see if you could kind of make a short comment on. One is, could you describe what happened when the Legal Services Corporation tried to require the state to consolidate all the programs into one, and whether or not that, I think you were heavily involved in in that, and why we felt that keeping a standalone program was important to the client community. And the second thing I think is, I just wondered if you could discuss that a little further about the compromise on the private attorney involvement program, or component to legal services when Ronald Reagan went in, because of your role in helping to set up the first volunteer lawyer project. Those are the two things.
Yeah, let me just talk. Let me talk about the second question first, because that I guess in chronologically that happened first. That was after Ronald Reagan was elected president. He proposed, and when he first came into office, in each year that he was in office, each of the 8 years, he proposed no funding for legal services. Basically, he zeroed out Legal Services Corporation federal funding for legal services each year in his budget, his proposed budget. So the real concern there was among the private bar. They realized that the private bar was not in a position to provide on a pro bono basis the legal needs of poor people throughout the country. So the American Bar Association took the lead in terms of trying to work out some type of compromise along those lines so that legal services would continue to exist. And the compromise that was worked out was that the funding for legal services would be cut by 25%. But legal private lawyers would then be urged to provide pro bono or free services to low-income people. And so one of the regulations that developed after that was that at least 12.5% of the funding to the Legal Services Corporation or to the program had to be used to involve private lawyers in the development of or in the provision of legal services to poor people. So that was the compromise that was reached. And of course, we then had to try to make sure that happened. We had to figure out a way to spend the 12.5% and to get private lawyers, especially in Mississippi, who had not been, for the most part, providing free legal services to poor people in the past. And so one of the tasks that I was given by Wilhelm Joseph was to work with the Mississippi Bar leadership to try to develop a program in which we would have an established program in which private lawyers could then provide those services to poor people. And so we had there was a time when at the time back during the early 80s, 1980, 1981, that was really on the aftermath of the 70s after North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, and actually even other legal services programs in the state had filed various class action lawsuits which didn't sit well with the establishment and didn't sit well with private lawyers. And so they viewed legal services and North Mississippi Rural Legal Services in disdain. And so it was a challenge to try to bring that leadership of the bar to the table to discuss involving private lawyers in delivering legal services to poor folks. So Wilhelm felt like, I had I guess, the ability to relate to people in a respectful way. So we entered into negotiations with the Mississippi Bar leadership. And so we had some contentious meetings to try to work out, to try to at least convince them that legal services, working with North Mississippi Rural Legal Services and the other legal services programs to represent poor folks, was something that they should do as a professional, as a duty to the legal profession. And so we were successful at communicating with each other. There were some hard times in terms of, just tough negotiations and feelings being hurt. And then we kind of worked through that. And we finally got to the point where we decided that there should be an organization that was set up that would play that role in terms of being an entity where the legal services programs could refer poor people that needed legal services, and that private lawyers could go to a particular place, know that there are people there who need legal services, and could get cases and do cases, handle cases, and make a difference. And so what we agreed upon and what we decided was to set up an entity called the Mississippi Pro Bono Project. And that project involved the Mississippi Bar. So the Mississippi Bar, along with the legal services programs in the state at that point, formed the Mississippi Pro Bono Project. And so it initially worked out of the offices of the Mississippi Bar. And so that it showed that the Mississippi Bar had buy-in. And so that gave credibility to private lawyers who then saw that the Mississippi Bar endorsed this project. And so they could come to the Mississippi Pro Bono Project, take cases, and do legal work on behalf of poor people. And then those cases, on the other hand, the legal services programs would screen clients to make sure that they were income eligible according to the LSC guidelines, and refer those cases to the Mississippi Pro Bono Project. And so that's how we got that project started. And so now that project worked very well. And now they did change the name along the way, and the name now is the Mississippi Volunteer Lawyers Project, which has actually along the way has I think it has been awarded at least 2 national awards.
Hey, we've got about 2 minutes, y'all. We need to finish up so we can, so this one can convert before we get to Marion Tudor.
Could you, in the last 2 minutes, Ben, just describe really briefly what happened when the push was to consolidate the programs, because you were instrumental in keeping the program during that time.
Yes, that was the time I was executive director at that time, and I think it was around 2000, the year 2000, 2001, when the National Legal Services Corporation felt like it was more effective and more efficient to have a statewide program. At that time in Mississippi, I believe we had 6 legal service programs in the state. North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, I think pretty much from its inception, had 39 counties, 39 of the counties. So it was the largest program. It continued, it has always been the largest program in the state. There were 5 other programs. There was one in Jackson, one Hattiesburg, one Biloxi, I believe Meridian, and maybe, anyway, there were 5. Macomb, yes, that was the 5th. And so the corporation made it known to us that they as well as it was doing the same thing throughout the country. They were encouraging and in a lot of instances, forcing states to programs to consolidate into one statewide program. And their theory was that if rather than having, and say for example in Mississippi, rather than having 6 executive directors, you have 1 executive director, and you have 1 accounting department, and that kind of thing. And so we at North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, starting with our staff, felt like that was not the best for the client community in North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. And of course, as a lot of states, there are differences in different parts of the state. So Jackson, for example, it was more metropolitan. North Mississippi Rural Legal Services being more rural, and so the needs of the client community were somewhat different. Although, let's say maybe if a person had a consumer issue, the consumer issue in the metropolitan area was maybe somewhat different from the consumer issue in the rural area. This is give an example. And so we began to negotiate with the LSC. LSC then sent a consultant who was a retired legal services project director from Illinois, to come down and do the bidding for the Legal Services Corporation to force us to consolidate statewide. And so ultimately, what we did was we looked at some other states, and particularly we looked at Arkansas, where Arkansas had 2 programs. They had basically 1 program, primarily from Little Rock, who's more the urban area, and then they had the rural program in Jonesboro. And so we used that as the model to say that if it works in Arkansas, it can work in Mississippi. And so ultimately what happened was the other 5 programs consolidated to 1 program, which is now called the Mississippi Center for Legal Services, and then North Mississippi Rural Legal Services stayed the same. And so now we still have the 39 counties for North Mississippi Rural Legal Services. Mississippi Center for Legal Services has the remaining counties in the state of Mississippi. And so we think that that model works better. We were able to convince the Legal Services Corporation that model would work for us. They did set out initially some guidelines that they wanted us to follow, and that we had to live up to prove that it did work. It did work. And I will also say in closing that Miss Weatherby, Miss Catherine Weatherby, was a client, but she was a client board member at the time, and she took a lead role in those negotiations with the other legal services programs in the state, as well as with the Legal Services Corporation, in terms of working out this compromise that LSC finally accepted.
Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add at this time?
Well, I would just say, as I kind of think about back over the 21 years that I've served as executive director of North Mississippi Rural Legal Services, I have served as the longest tenure of any of the other project directors during the time. And I realized that, the length of time doesn't necessarily, I guess the question really is, what have you done during the time that you were in that position, whether you're in the position 2 years or whether you're in the position 20 years. And I think, basically my contribution is, I would just characterize my contribution as being, I would say, kind of like a steady hand to kind of keep the program, and I guess kind of use an old trucker's term, just keep it between the ditches, so to speak. So that, and we've been blessed to not have any major wrecks, so to speak. And that's what I mean by saying keeping it between the ditches. But we've come through a lot of ups and downs, cuts in funding, laying off staff, and those kind of things. But then we maintain the program throughout the years. There's been additional restrictions on the program, such as we can't be involved in class action litigation. So we can't bring the kinds of cases now that the program used to bring during its heyday, so to speak, back during the 70s. But at the same time, we have maintained an ability to continue to provide needed legal services to poor people in North Mississippi. And in the process, we've been somewhat successful in terms of attracting non-federal funding to expand the services that we are able to provide to poor people in North Mississippi rural legal services in the 39 county service area.
Thank you, Ben.
Excellent work, y'all. So, okay, well, I'm going to end it and then we'll convert this one and I will see you guys in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
You're welcome.